Thank you once again for joining us tonight and for coming to this final. Is this tonight our fourth or fifth shiur? I can't remember. I think it's our fifth shiur. But final thoughts about Pesach, specifically falling out during Chodesh Aviv, or the time of the Aviv, the time of spring. And I don't think we don't have a very long class tonight, but I think it's very, very important, and perhaps perhaps even most important. We're finally answering the questions that we started off with. There's an interesting Chazal. Chazal say that the Gemara in Sanhedrin. I actually heard this referenced a few times recently. The Chazal say that Afilu reikanin shabanu mileim mitzvos kerimot. That even people who seem to be the most empty have the least amount of merits. People who don't seem to be engaged in a life of Torah and mitzvos. Nevertheless, they are mileim mitzvos kerimon. They are full of mitzvos as a pomegranate is full of seeds. Not only that, he says that even when a person does the wrong thing, this is also Chazal, we understand that when a Jew does the wrong thing, it's not because the Jew's doing the wrong thing. It's because, as the Gemara in Kedushin tells us, Ein adam chote elam ke nichnas bo ruach shtut, which means that even when a person does the wrong thing, it's because of temporary insanity. It's because they've relinquished control over themselves. But who they are and what they want, and in terms of their sincerity and their neshama, they have no connection at all to the avera, to the sin. The Rambam writes that based on the Gemara in Gittin, that if somebody has to divorce his wife and he doesn't want to, there's a potential, I'm not saying it's practical, for many reasons it's not so practical, but there's a potential for forcing him, compelling him, quote unquote, against his will, to give the get, to give the divorce document. And it's still going to be kosher. And the question is, why? In order for a get to be kosher, it has to be given willingly. A get, a divorce that's not given willingly, by definition is not a get. It's nothing. And the Rambam writes like this. I'll read it in Hebrew. Very, very important. Rambam, very well-known, very well-known piece. Shein omrim anus el lamisha nilchatz v'nidchak lasos davar she'enu mechuyev bo min haTorah. In ones, which is when I'm compelled to do something against my will, is only true for a person who's forced to do something that he's not obligated to do within the bounds of Torah. Kigon, for example, mishahuka acha machar o acha nasan. You force somebody to sell something or give something to you against his will. So that's called an ones. And he's doing something. It's not a real sale. It's not a real matana, not a real gift, because he has no intention of giving it to you on any level. Aval misha takvo yitzer hara levatel mitzvah. Somebody who's yitzer hara got so strong that he encourages him to go to avoid doing a mitzvah, olasos avera, or to transgress a sin. V'huka, and he's been beaten. Acha asa davar shechayev lasoso. But in this case, you force him against, quote unquote, against his will, to do something that he's really obligated to do. Or you force him to distance himself from something that he's not supposed to do. Einze anus mimenu. That's not called an onis. Elahu anas atzma b'datu hara. He forced himself because of his bad das, because of his bad opinions and ways and thoughts, etc. Lefigach, therefore, this person says he doesn't want to divorce his wife. He's not living with her, so he just doesn't want to give her a get. But he wants to be a Jew. He certainly wants to do all the mitzvos and distance himself from the sins. The Yitzra Husha Takfo, his Yitzhahara has gotten the better of him. So when you beat him, you're essentially beating the Yitzhahara out of him, and you're getting it's like an onion. You're just removing layers of onion, and you're getting to the good stuff inside. And then he says, Rotzani, Garash Liritzono, says the Rambam. He's actually divorcing her according to his will. That is to say, that who we are at our core are people that really want to do the Ratzon Hashem, the will of God. In some cases, Beis Din has the power to remove the Yitzhahara, so they're allowed to. As I said, this is not practical. This is not done anymore, and certainly it's not something I would encourage anyone to do. But the concept of the Rambam, the idea that the Rambam is saying that a Jew at his core, at her core, at a soul level, is a person who bipnimius, who internally is a person who wants to do the Ratzon Hashem, that's a critical idea. You see, the non-Jews of the world, they ask a question. And they're going to ask a question in the future. The Jewish people are chosen. Jewish people are special. You forced them. You compelled them. You made them accept the Torah. As the Gemara tells us in Shabbos, Kaf alem har kigigis. God, it's like he held the mountain over us to force us at the time of Kabbalah Torah to accept the Torah upon ourselves. So the Gemara teaches us in Avodah Zarah that the non-Jews are going to say, had you forced us, we would have taken it too. So the Gemara says that Hashem is going to answer them simply, look, I gave you 7 mitzvahs and you rejected those, you didn't keep those. But according to the Rambam, says Rav Sorotzkin, the Rambam is saying something really fascinating, according to Rabbi Sorotzkin, saying that Hashem wants to give the Torah to the group of people who really has a Ratzon Tov, who in their inner core are people who really desire the Torah. When did Klal Yisrael demonstrate the desire for the Torah and for the mitzvos? Before God compelled them, before God forced them. When they said, Naaseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. Later, the Satan convinced them to be afraid of God, and then God had to compel them. That's how Tosos learns in Shabbos. So yeah, there was an element of God forcing us to accept the Torah. But before that, before the Yitzhahara came along and tried to discourage us, at our core we were people who said, Naaseh v'nishma. We wanted this special relationship with Hashem. But the Umos HaOlam, but the nations of the world that we know, the Medrash tells us, God offered them the Torah and they said, what does it say? No, thank you. So they did not say Naaseh v'nishma, and therefore that was the end of the conversation. We said Naaseh v'nishma, and so there was a continuing discussion between us and Hashem, that even when we kind of resisted it, so Hashem then compelled us. But that came on the heels of our internal Ratzon. That came on the heels of understanding who we were at our core. Okay. The cherus, the freedom that the Jewish people attained when we left Mitzrayim, according to the Jewish idea of freedom, as we said before, is Ezehu HaGibor HaKovish Es Yitzro. A true Gibor, a true mighty person, a really free person is one who's able to choose how to live his life, not be bound up by his desires and his drives, his impulses, his urges. The strength to overcome one's will or one's inclination. I'll share I don't know if it's a vulnerability or not, or a cute moment here. Didn't ask my wife permission, so don't tell her. Just kidding. My daughter is in high school and she's taking APs. And she's taking 2 APs this year. Last year she took world history. This year she's taking psychology and English. And the tests are after Pesach, and we haven't paid for them yet. And my daughter had asked one of us, I won't say which one, to make sure that we call the school and pay for it. And we got busy, didn't get taken care of. These things happen. In many relationships, in many marriages, you could imagine the spouse losing patience with the other one. Like, why didn't you take care of it? You're supposed to take care of it. Now what's going to be? She lost the opportunity. She's been studying, and now she can't take the AP. And before you know it, there's a molehill, and it becomes a mountain. And instead of it just being a something that, okay, whatever it is, what it is, let's move on with our life, it becomes a major conflict between husband and wife. You can see such a thing happening in some couples, can't you? Like, she didn't take care of it, you're supposed to take care of it. Now our kid is messed up because of it. The quote-unquote guilty party didn't say anything. And the other party simply said, I guess the daughter should have asked the other parent or something like that. Okay, it wasn't a major dig. Probably could have been avoided. I could have avoided saying it, but okay. And then we reached out to the teacher who's in charge of the AP and said, by the way, we'd like to pay for it, and we haven't paid for it yet. We hope it's not too late. She says, don't worry about it. You have till after Pesach. Okay? So in other words, nothing happened, and it was no big deal. Okay. Now, the ability to refrain from saying something, that wouldn't help. What's it going to do? What's it going to do to say something? Is it going to change anything? Is it going to make it that it would be paid for? Is anything going to be better, or is it just going to be destructive? There's no question that it's a nisayon, it's a challenge of one's midos. And it's very hard to not say something, but it's a sign of gevura when one does not say something when they could be saying something, or they're thinking to say something. Somehow or another, when it comes to Lashon Hara, it's harder a little bit, especially if you have a really good line. But again, not saying something takes tremendous gevura, but real freedom is being able to not say something. That is acherus olam. That's real freedom. It's freedom from the Yetzer Hara. And that's something that the Jews have in every generation, wherever they are. Even in Auschwitz, a Jew has that level of freedom. Even amongst pogroms and slaughterings, shootings and knifings, we have that level of freedom. We're free. We're b'nei chorim. When it comes to matters of the soul, we have this nikuda pnimiyut. We have this inner point that no Tzorer Yisrael, none of our enemies can touch. If anything, the opposite is true. When gezeros, kashos, and ra'os, when terrible decrees are made against the Jewish people, when the blood of the Jews is flowing like water, that's when that inner freedom it shines the most. I just read this week that it's fascinating. In Sfarad, in Spain, in the 1400s, during the times of the Inquisition, it was the simplest Jews, the folksy people, the backwards people, if you will, the people, the villagers, were the ones who had the biggest ability to be moser nefesh. I don't have it in front of me. I think it's Rabbi Weinberger's Haggadah. Someone showed it to me yesterday. He says that a lot of the intellectuals, a lot of the people with a lot of money, they converted to Catholicism. But the simple Jews who knew very little about Yiddishkeit, they stood up for Hashem. And he tells a story about someone nowadays as well, where there was a very, very simple Jew, someone who didn't keep Shabbos, wasn't connected at all. And they asked him, what would you do for God? He said, for God? And he rips his shirt up and he says, for God, I give my life. Someone in Israel. A Jew is a Jew at his or her core. That level of cherus, that level of freedom, that's something that we have no matter where we are. And that's why we say, God, when he passed over, he killed the firstborn of the Mitzrayim. He took the Jews out. L'cherus olam, forever. because he's speaking about the Jewish soul, not necessarily the Jewish body. Our last point, and here we're going to talk about spring, and I think this is a really, really powerful and interesting idea. We know that, and he says that this point of freedom, that we are so different than the nations of the world when it comes to freedom. He says you see it in nature. He says in winter, and we in California have a harder time relating to this, and we're not really agriculturally sensitive, although some of us may have green thumbs. But in winter, basically the land is locked. It's locked up. It's covered in snow and ice, and even in warmer climates, especially where it rains a lot, it's muddy. It's not. It's sitting water. It's not a place that's very pleasant. He says, basically, you have a road. The road is a public thoroughfare, and nobody veers from the road in the winter. And the land on the side of the road, the fields, they lay fallow, and they're inaccessible. The spring, though, is a time of cheres, a time of freedom. The snow melts, the water drains, the land dries out, the greenery sprouts, the trees bud, the figs and the grapes, the fruit starts to develop, the birds are singing. And people go out, laganim, pardesim, people go out to the gardens and to the orchards. And it's a time of freedom. Spring is a time of freedom in that way. Now he says like this, when it comes to the umos ha'olam, when it comes to the nations of the world, what happens? What's freedom? Freedom is hefkerus. Freedom is an opportunity, is anarchy. Freedom is control. Freedom is not being controlled by someone else. Pritas hagedorim v'hasigim. He says, like you see by the umos ha'olam, like you see in the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. We know the religion was it's thrown out the window. Let us make up our own rules. I saw today someone posted that they did a poll. If your child were to do one of the three following things, which one would bother you the most? Change his religion, change his identity or gender, or one of those kinds of things, or change his political party. And as you might guess, number 3 was the one that was the most difficult for parents to swallow. That's the world we live in. Now, he says, imagine the earth. Imagine the earth itself was like the Umos Ha'olam. Imagine he had a Luhay Lo Peh. Imagine the earth is able to speak to you. What would it say in the spring? Al Tigubi, don't touch me. I'm free now. I want to just enjoy myself. Don't tear my heart out with a plow. Don't bang posts into me. Don't put seeds into me. Don't put up fences. I'm not interested in being controlled by humanity. I want to live my own life. Imagine a field saying that. What would happen if people were to listen to the fields and would say, oh yeah, have a good taina? Sholetke hogen? You're saying good? What would happen? We know what happens. Did everyone see those videos in COVID during the lockdown? Animals started roaming the streets. Wild animals started roaming the streets. Wild pigs in Eretz Yisrael, coyotes and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, right? It was like they're literally in the streets. When humanity takes a step back, nature takes over. What would happen to your fields? would become full of thorns, coats vidardar. Weeds would run rampant. And maybe it would be pretty, but you wouldn't have any food. The animals would take it back over. But a human being who has an neshama, and a human being has a neshama, we're sensitive people. We need ma'achal madinim. We need very delicate foods. So we have a different reality. We can't allow the land to just go wild. In order for the land to serve its purpose, to serve its function, we have to work it. For it to be there to serve humanity, we have to work the land. And that'll bring out the greatest sweetness and the best products from the land. And that's what it's meant for. So comes along man in the springtime, in the time of the freedom of the earth. And what does he do? He works the land. Freedom is a time of work. Spring brings about a positive impact on a human being. We throw off our burdens of the winter. We leave our homes, place where we were basically locked in. And we see ourselves in the spring as if we're going out to freedom. And we have a choice. What's that choice? Choice is to just relax or to work, and to work the land, and so we have bread for the rest of the year. He says, of course, in the cities, people do take summer vacations, right? And we're not as much connected to this. But look at how farmers live their life. Comes along spring, they start to work hard. Time of freedom is a time for hard work. So what's cherus? What is freedom? It's not just to be porik all. It's not just to reject the Torah, to live lives that are simply lives of, what's the expression? Eat, drink, and be merry. But rather, it's to live lives that are meaningful, lives that have fences, lives that have levels of control. So Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, took us out of Avdus, from slavery to cherus. So we might think, oh, we're free, we do what we want. God forbid. He says no. What's he says Mitzrayim for? Why did Hashem take us out specifically in the spring? Hayom atam yotam hachodesh ha'aviv, like we said, so many times the Torah stresses the idea of the spring to teach us about the importance, the lesson from the spring, that what is cherus, what is freedom? It's the freedom of spring. It's the freedom of hard work. Musar, midos, maisim tovim, mitzvos. This is the lesson that we're meant to take. So therefore, Hashem takes us out of Mitzrayim, specifically during the spring. And therefore, we celebrate the holiday of Pesach, Zman Cheruseinu, specifically during the spring, because the lesson of the spring is self-control, hard work. And that, of course, is ultimately what we're here for, what our cherus is for. We go through this process, and of course, it brings us to Shavuos, where we're given the framework and the Torah, etc., to teach us how to maximize our hard work, how to make the most of it. But ultimately, this is the idea of leaving Mitzrayim, specifically in the spring. I thank you for joining us, those of you that stayed all the way till the end here of the whole series. I think it gives us an appreciation of Pesach, an appreciation of Pesach specifically during the spring, an appreciation of what we mean by Chag HaMatzos, Zman Chiruseinu, time of our freedom. And my bracha to you and to all of us is that indeed it be a Zman of Cherus, and we feel the most free when we're connected to Hashem in a meaningful way. We do that then we'll be Zoche B'ezrat Hashem to the ultimate Geula, with the coming of Mashiach to the kingdom here of Yameinu. I hope B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow night, I'd say probably around 8 o'clock, but we'll put something out. We'll talk about the Haggadah itself, and that should hopefully will be interesting and informative and help us get ready for the Seder. Eitan Avigail, how can I help you?